Today we have the pleasure of having Dan Nelson speak to us once again. And as I have put a little word about Dan here, he's a technician, teacher, researcher. He runs Avatar computer training here in Nelson. And today we are now talking about various forms of patterns and vibrations in nature and how they relate to consciousness, energy, technology, and mind, body, spirit awareness.
Oh, cool.
Does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
Okay.
I could have picked any number of topics that relate to sacred geometry, and that sounds great. So yeah, you're stuck here with me now, and I'm going to take you down the rabbit hole, perhaps.
Yes.
And sacred geometry is one of my favorite subjects because it actually connects to everything. And it connects to alchemy, it connects to quantum mechanics, it connects to astrophysics, on and on and on. And cultures around the world have had these same symbols. And when I'm talking about sacred geometry, I'm talking about the universal patterns and the archetypes and the themes that we see all around the world. And when you look at nature, nature follows these forms and patterns. And so it's really interesting to find out what are those patterns and forms. There's like a master grid of ratios and frequencies and shapes. And it relates to consciousness, it relates to the elements and the forces of nature. Basically, it relates to everything we see in the outside world. But then the outside world is actually a reflection of what's going on inside. So it's really neat when we study nature, we start finding all of these patterns. And all of the ancient philosophers have always come up with these patterns, like Plato and Aristotle and Archimedes, Pythagoras. So these are ancient symbols, and one of the most amazing symbols that we see in about 40 countries around the world. There's a great list, you can look it up on YouTube, and it's the flower of life. So the flower of life, you see it embedded in stone all around the world, at a lot of sacred temples, ancient sites. So it's one archetypal form that a lot of the forms come from. So who's heard of the flower of life?
I'm wearing earrings.
Okay. Right.
Is that
so,
the Yanta?
What's this?
Is it the Yanta?
The Sri Yantra?
Yeah.
Well, the Sri Yantra is related. So a lot of the forms come out of the flower of life. I'm not an expert on the Sri Yantra, but maybe somebody here is and can share something about that. But the flower of life itself is really cool because it embeds pi, it embeds the phi ratio, the golden mean spiral. It's got the seed of life and the egg of life and the tree of life, all the platonic solids. So it's a really neat place to start from to see universal patterns. So I put together a whole bunch of slides, and I think there's 90 or something, but I don't even know if we're going to get through them, but we'll see what happens. So I'm gonna load my slideshow here. So now, unfortunately, my projector isn't very bright. It's quite old. I got it a long time ago. So hopefully you can see, but I'm sure you can see the
Maybe if we turn
images.
this light off here, it might
Okay,
help.
yeah, we don't need that light on.
Or the kitchen light too.
Yeah.
So I called my talk Sacred Geometry and Universal Archetypes because there are different archetypes that you see also to do with deities and all kinds of, I call it the various forms, patterns, and vibrations in nature, how they relate to consciousness, energy technology, and mind, body, spirit awareness. So when we look at some of these sacred geometric shapes, you can see that I've actually built some out of cardboard. Like, so this is one of the 5 platonic solids here. So you can see it's got 12 sides. It's really neat, but when we ponder these shapes, it has an effect on our consciousness. And when we're aligned, we fit in perfectly into these ratios. So let's say that we're out of phase and we're stressed out and we're confused and we're conflicted. We can see that our heart beats out of phase and it's not in alignment. But when we clear our energy field and we go into alignment, we can even meditate on a shape. We'll notice that a shape helps, like looking at the flower of life, the crop circles. A lot of the crop circles, I'm sure everybody's seen crop circles, right? So when you look at crop circles, they can really help you align. And when we tune in, we'll notice that our heart starts beating in rhythm, and it starts beating in phase with some of these sacred ratios. And these sacred ratios relate to the Platonic solids. So actually, you want to pass that around, everybody can take a look.
Dan,
Yes.
can you explain what a platonic solid is?
Well, a Platonic solid, well, I'm going to get to that.
No worries. Later.
But I'm going to try and go in sort of a linear order. I don't think it's going to work, but we'll see what happens. Because you never know what it's going to bring up.
Be your first linear presentation.
I've never done a linear presentation. It's just
Ever.
No, never. It doesn't work. So what is sacred geometry? It's what we're surrounded by in the natural world. I call it a master grid of interconnectivity because you can see how every subject relates to it. And it's also right brain and left brain. All of these different shapes have a feminine and masculine form, and the feminine form is more based on circles, and the masculine form is more based on interconnected lines. So it relates to mathematics, religion, sound and vibration. So you'll notice that certain frequencies create form in dust or in sand. Certain sounds can create these shapes. And that's really interesting. And the shapes themselves create the sounds by measuring all the angles in one of the Platonic solids. So when we think about the universe, in order to relate to it, we have to think in different dimensions. So normally we think in 3 dimensions as far as space. So up, down, left, right, forward, backward. So you can imagine these are the 3 dimensions that we would normally think of in space. But according to quantum mechanics, there's 11 dimensions. The particle accelerator theory shows the quarks, the way that they behave, reveals many other dimensions and apparently there's 3 time dimensions, and I've heard that said in different ways, if you can imagine that. If anything, it's kind of fun just to look at these shapes. So you can see here, there's a feminine, the curves are more feminine, and these lines are more considered masculine because they're more direct and pointed. So that's masculine. Feminine is round and sort of spherical, kind of like the Earth. So, if you think the Earth is flat, that might be a more masculine way of thinking about things. But you'll notice that the sphere is so sacred because it's one of the most universal symbols. You suspend something in a vacuum, it's going to form a sphere. You look at magnetic fields, and one of the most interesting things that we'll see in physics is the toroidal magnetic field that comes out of our heart, and we can see it with EEG technology that you have in hospitals, biophoton cameras. They show that there's a toroidal field around our heart just the way there is around an atom or around our Earth when you look at the Van Allen radiation belt or the Earth's aura. The Earth's aura is also a toroidal field. So yeah, you have a circle, but you have a torus that's like, in our DNA also, the spiral field, it eventually goes into a toroidal field. So this is one of the other sacred shapes that we'll come across a lot when we're studying different topics, is the torus. And that it also embeds itself into the flower of life. So the amazing, super cool thing about sacred geometry is that everything relates to everything else so perfectly. And if it doesn't relate, then you're probably not following the grid or you're out of phase in some way. But you can see here, if you were to take just the circle and you double it, you have a form of duality. You're basically going out of oneness into duality, but in the duality is a birth, which is like the Vesica Pisces. So the Vesica Pisces in a lot of, like, Jesus came out of a stargate. That's in one of the translations from the Bible. So that Vesica Pisces is also called like a wormhole or a stargate. Does anybody know any other names for it? Anyway, it's also called the fish. You see it in the Bible as a fish. It comes up again and again in cultures all around the world. And then you have this. So if you were to do a third circle, you have like the Holy Trinity, or like the, I guess it's called the Genesis pattern. Is that the Genesis pattern? Well, it's sort of like that. But this has a lot of names as well. You'll see that all around the world. You can see that the Vesica Pisces, you see it in nebulas and galaxies. There's that shape I was talking about, the stargate, of which it's like the birth canal, right? It's the same metaphor. So all of these shapes are also metaphors, and we see it in human beings. We see it in nature. We see it in plants. So you can see here it is again. You see it all around the world. And now, if you were to copy that circle over and over until it's repeated, and you do a full circle with the circles, you have what's called the seed of life. Now, a circle is 360 degrees. So that's 12 times 5. So you think of the 5 fingers that we have, and you think of the number 12. 12 is a very significant number. You end up with 360. Is that how that? What is
30 times 12.
What is it?
30 times 12.
30 times 12?
Mhm.
Well, that number, 12, 60, 2160, the 360 degrees, if you were to multiply that by the number of circles here, you end up with the number 2160, which actually, if you were to put that into a frequency, it fits into C sharp. So the other amazing thing about a lot of these shapes is that they create frequencies that create the circle of the musical scale, the circle of fifths, that was originally came up with. Who came up with that circle? Does anybody know? One of the famous mathematicians, Plato, he discovered the Platonic solids, but they're way older than Plato, of course. But it was Pythagoras. So it's also called the Pythagorean solids, not just the Platonic solids. In other schools, they're called Pythagorean solids because he discovered them as well. But also Pythagoras took all the angles in all the Platonic solids and created a music scale based on it, which has used all around the world, which is then based on a ratio that fits into the number 432 or 2160. Those are the sacred numbers you'll see that relate to the size of the earth, the size of the moon, the size of the sun, the relationship between the sun and the moon. All the planets in our solar system can be discovered by looking at these ratios. So whether you follow me with this or not, it's really cool. Look at the shapes, it's really neat. Now you can see here, when you create another circles, you end up with the flower of life, and you do another set of circles around that, you end up with this flower of life, or in this case they're saying the fruit of life comes from this, but it's the template for all material reality. So this is one of the most sacred shapes that I first talked about. Now you can see, if you were to take that first pattern, this is where you can get the tree of life as well. Anybody familiar with the tree of life?
Yes.
And you can see here's the tree of life, how it fits in to the flower of life. So, anybody want to say something about the tree of life?
It has resemblance to the Jewish structure of what I don't
Yeah,
know
the
what you call it.
Kabbalistic tree.
Heaven.
That's what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, the Kabbalistic tree. So it's interesting because there's always been this, the alchemist that was trying to solve the riddle of the tree of life, or the Kabbalistic tree. And it's really interesting because when you look at this, oh, there it is, there's those symbols. Here it is again. Now, solving, I think Nassim thought he solved the riddle.
You didn't?
Well, maybe he did. I mean, it makes sense that he did, because if you take the tree of life here, and you take 8 of them and put them all together, you end up with the
Yes.
the tetragrammaton, the 64 vector metrics with the vector equilibrium. So this is another sacred symbol, but really that's the masculine form of the tree of life. And in that form, you see all these different nodes. There's so many structures that come out of this, all the platonic solids, and I will end up getting to that, maybe. So you can see here, this relates, there's 64 nodal points in here that relate to the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, the King Wen sequence that we use when we do the divination. Did anybody ever do the
I
three
Ching.
coins, the I Ching? You do this? Okay. So a lot of people use the I Ching as a divination system to tell them the forces that are at play in the universe and help you make decisions, when you should make certain decisions and when you shouldn't make decisions, stuff like that, right? But it also relates to the 64 codons of the DNA. And there's several other traditions that connect with this grid based on 64 very universal symbol. So here it is rotating.
An interesting point on that is that the connection to the traditions, ancient traditions, but also the connection to science and math. Right? It's like we think that we just came up with the mathematics lately,
Yes.
and yet these perfect diagrams, which are the math, come from thousands of...
This is what is so beautiful, like going to the math websites, the Wikipedia articles on these shapes, a lot of mathematicians discovered these. They're like, look what we discovered, it's like the vector equilibrium or whatever they call it. And then you go and see these ancient pictographs and they've already talked about these thousands of years ago.
Yeah, we have buildings that are dated at 12,500 years that have these etched into them.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
a lot of these ancient sites.
Well, Petra is one of them in Jordan, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and, well, of course... the Assyrian temple.
Yeah.
And the etchings are very interesting because we would use a laser technology to laser it onto the surface of the rock. But when the rock gets chipped, the actual design goes right in deep
Through and
into the
through,
rock.
yeah.
It's like
So the flower of
The
life,
crop circles.
these
even
ancient
know how-
technologies managed to pull that into a stone. So how did they etch
Yeah,
a flower of life three-dimensionally into a
into
stone?
the stone, right?
And
We
so
don't
you
even
chip
have
it out.
that technology now.
Well, no,
And it
but
was
it's-
done thousands of
IBM
years.
says they use
Yeah.
2 lasers from different angles, and when they touch, it burns. So that's one way, but then
Inside granite?
yeah, inside of granite, like,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. My feeling is that they cut it from another dimension, from a higher dimension. So you would have to be fairly advanced to start working on a different dimension, because in our culture, we're still thinking in more 3 dimensions. Like, most of our consciousness is still not expanded into a 4th dimension, because I believe that the brain can't handle moving into a higher dimension, because you would lose your mind, and I think that you have to be okay with losing your mind. But it's okay to lose your mind if you know how to be centered in your heart. And the heart does operate in a field that is multidimensional, higher dimension. And in fact, in the Mayan culture, the 2nd dimension of time is relating to 4th density, which is synchronicity. So when you find yourself in a very high synchronicity, you are operating on a 5th dimension, on a higher dimension. And that means that your heart field is very connected. And so that your synchronicity is bringing you into that higher dimension. So that's one way of thinking of, I think, of the higher dimension, is the synchronicity. This is the egg of life. When you remove the inner circles, you end up with the egg of life. And that, of course, what does that look like? Well, it looks exactly like the embryo or mitosis when cells split and they split again. The flower of life comes out of the division of cells when they grow in the embryo. So the embryo keeps doubling. I don't have any more pictures, but you can imagine it ends up looking like this, and that's like the zygote. Is that what that's called? So the zygote comes out of the flower of life on the cellular level. And so does almost everything that comes into the, I think every biological form that comes into the universe comes in through this shape. And that's again why it's really universal. Now, if you take away these other circles here, you get this grid, which is called the holy archetype. It's the female version of Metatron's cube. So Metatron's cube is when you take the center of each of these circles and connect them through lines. Now, is everybody familiar with this shape? Is anybody familiar with that shape? Show of hands. Okay, so half the people. So Metatron's cube is a very profound shape. One of the main shapes that you can see coming out of Metatron's cube is this, which I built out of cardboard too. It's the star tetrahedron. Now the star tetrahedron is a pretty neat shape because if you were to put that into a sphere, the edges line up with the two ring of fires on the Earth or on the sun where all of the sunspots show up on these points here, right? And same with on Mars. Olympus Mons, the largest mountain in the solar system, is right on one of those points. So that's another, this is a way to describe where forces exist inside of planetary bodies. Do you want to pass that around? But that comes out of the Metatron's cube, but all of the platonic solids come out of the Metatron's cube, so we're getting to the platonic solids. And
You didn't bring your little ones.
oh, I did bring my little
Did you?
ones. They're in that bag.
That will be helpful for.
Oh yeah, the little ones, because they're easier to pass around. Actually, I created these little ones with these templates I just printed on the internet. So you can go on the internet and print a template like that and do it on cardstock. You can find any of these templates on the internet. Type in star tetrahedron, vector equilibrium, any of these shapes, and you'll get a template. And it tells you how to fold it, and it folds into this.
Wow. Can you make a 3D printer do things like that?
Exactly, absolutely. If you have a
Anybody
3D
got
printer, if you build your own, it's pretty cheap. The Tech Club has a 3D printer, but you can go online and just download the DWG, the 3D map, to print any of the platonic solids. But that's neat idea to have a 3D printer. This is the dodecahedron, but let's see if you can name the shapes as we pass them along. See, to name the shapes, you just take the number of sides, and it's Greek, right? So there's 4 tetrahedron. And tetrahedron, I made it red because tetrahedron relates to fire. And in fact, I guess it's Wemyss or something. In the chemical, to describe fire, you have to have 4 elements. So anyway, this makes fire, and Plato said also this is the symbol that represents fire, as far as forces. So that's tetra, meaning 4, tetrahedron. And then there's also the cube, which is called the hexahedron, because hex, 6 sides, hexahedron. And then you've also got the dodecahedron in your hand. Dodeca means 12. And then you've got the icosahedron, which is 20 sides.
Wow.
Then there's another icosahedron.
How many sides does this have?
20
I think it's 20.
or 24?
Is it? I don't
It's
know.
the
I
same
can't
as this
remember
one.
now.
3 times 4 is 24.
That's also
24.
called the star tetrahedron.
It's
But
the same.
the
Yeah,
star
they're
tetrahedron is 2 tetrahedrons, one this shape and one that shape. So it's the male and the female coming together is what it also represents.
It's 24.
To be precise.
Heat, fuel, oxygen, and chemical reaction.
You know that one
24.
because you were
24.
the fire thing. You know what I'm talking about.
3 times.
Heat. What is it?
Heat, fuel, oxygen.
So heat,
Yeah.
fuel, oxygen, in the middle chemical reaction. That's the 4 elements of fire. So
Take one away, you have no fire.
Now we want to see a
Can you go
joke.
to your pretty slides with the art about the
pretty slides.
platonic
Chemical
solids?
reaction.
Oh, you'll
Okay,
get
yeah.
there.
So here we have the platonic solids finally, and the platonic solids right at the top. Well, the star tetrahedron is not a platonic solid, but platonic solid means all of the angles are the same, all of the points touch a sphere, and all the faces are the same, have the same surface area.
Okay.
There's other categories, though, that platonic solids could fit into. Now, there's another shape that is really common in chemistry and in physics. Buckminster Fuller called it the vector equilibrium. And it comes out of this seed of life. But what it is that all of the points are the same side. It's basically the most balanced energetic shape that you can have in nature as far as different people have determined. So it has different names, this,
So someone figured out that fire is based on the tetrahedron.
Yeah.
And needs all four to be present to
To
have
be-
fire.
that's right.
So then the thought was, so how do I, if I don't want fire, how do I extinguish fire? And you could take it away by cooling, by
Right.
removing fuel,
yeah.
by suffocating it so it doesn't have oxygen.
Yeah,
Or
so-
somehow stopping the chemical reaction.
So that's interesting. So then you can take out any of those four elements
And
and
it's
you
not
wouldn't have
that
fire.
anymore.
Right.
It can't exist.
That's neat. So then,
So if you extrapolate that to other shapes that have that as a basis,
Yeah.
without any piece of that,
Yeah.
it can't
exist.
Yeah.
That's right. So all of the platonic solids relate to elements. So the tetrahedron is fire. The hexahedron or the cube, the cube is earth. And when we have the octahedron is air, the eight-sided, and then we have the icosahedron, which is water. Dodecahedron is ether or prana or spirit or universe.
What's the water one again?
The water is the icosahedron. That's there.
How many sides?
It's got 20 sides.
Oh,
So here I made a black icosahedron. It's really easy to make these shapes. You just cut cardboard.
There's a fair bit of study around water, Dan.
Yeah.
And then when they look at it though, it's sort of, when they've looked at it really highly magnified, isn't it different shapes?
The
of that?
crystals.
Yes.
So how does that work with that shape, if there's so many different?
See, that's something that I don't have the answer to right now. How is the icosahedron related to water? It could be that the angles are at 60 degrees, which is what the H2O. Maybe it's to do with that level,
Yeah.
or yeah.
I just reading some pretty new, interesting stuff about that, and they call water a chameleon.
A
So,
chameleon.
The chameleon, because it can take on various shapes depending on the energy that it's surrounding it. Like when we bless water, it changes the structure of the
Right.
water. So,
Well, they used to say water had 3 states, but it's got a lot more than that.
right.
Solid, liquid, gas, but it could be in a plasma
Energetic.
state. It could actually, there's a 5th state of water, there's a TED Talk about it, which is the crystalline or the energetic magnitude of water. And the
Right.
ability to store memory is another property of water.
Right, right.
And it is the only entity on our planet that expand when it freezes and contract when it thaws. That's the opposite of all of them.
Yeah, there's so many properties of water, it's such an interesting
It's an
idea.
interesting one.
Yeah,
My favorite.
like where does water come from?
Outside, I heard.
Right, well, there's so many theories on that.
I just got a thought
Yeah.
about, okay, like homeopathy, does that have a connection to water? You're talking, because it says water has a memory, and yet like homeopathy is based on energy imprint. Because it technically doesn't exist when it's so diluted, yet that's what gives it the power.
Right.
So, I don't know, just trying to.
I'm sure there's. some-
According to Schauberger, it's an entity that regenerates itself when it's spiraling like that.
Yeah, and that's
Rid
actually
of the-
another theory that's coming out of the electrical universe, is that water is created through magnetic fields. So that's an interesting idea too. Yes.
Love water. It's
I
my
think
love.
I don't really understand what I'm gonna ask you, but,
Okay.
and I don't even know if it's possible to even think of it.
Yes.
But what I'm wondering is,
Great, that's good. Very nonlinear.
all these different shapes that are so amazing and that we're finding out has been there for thousands of years,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's possible to meditate on them without a mind, just
Yeah.
silence, and get back to the place from whence they come, from where they have
Yes.
their inspiration, their gifts to us.
Right.
Because we're just looking at them and this is interesting and that's fascinating and this is water and this is fire.
Yeah.
But we're not learning how to be with them, to go
Well, this is
into
good.
them and become, because everything that's given to us is given to us for us to evolve, raise consciousness, and it seems that rediscovering them is probably playing some part, not just how
This is so
Interesting.
true, because we're now rediscovering elements that are inside of ourselves. And where they all seem to connect is in the heart. So when we're completely centered into our heart core, all of these shapes kind of come together. That's the way I feel about it, because we have all these parts, right?
Yes.
And they can be represented by the shapes. So in the center, for me, what I've experienced is when I've managed to be completely centered and transcend my body and just have a spiritual awakening inside my core, I actually see a spinning Metatron's cube. And that's when I first discovered it on my own. I had that experience. There was a spinning Metatron's cube. I didn't know what it was at the time because it was a long time ago. It was crystalline shape. But that's when I had been completely balanced, and it felt like, and that's what the Metatron's cube is. It's all of the shapes. So when we do ponder these shapes, they are archetypal forces and parts of ourselves. So I think that help meditating on fire. There's a tetrahedron, fire. Hexahedron is the earth. So these are really good shapes. But if we ponder on those, they do relate to the chakra system as well, but I'm not sure how yet. Maybe somebody else knows the answer to that. Well, the other thing about these shapes is if you add all the angles add up to 720, 2160, which is a C sharp. That's an F sharp. And this is, of course, the Pythagoras, that's how he came up to find the music scale. He's like, well, that's why all these cultures around the world are using this music scale, because those notes, or those frequencies, are so harmonic that it puts matter into a coherent state. So if you were to take a C sharp and you play it to put a plate of sand, put a C sharp that's the proper C sharp, not the adjusted one, but the balanced one that fits into the master grid. And that you see shapes like a star tetrahedron comes out of a C sharp. You see it in the sand. So these are universal. The study of cymatics shows us that these harmonic numbers create coherence. And so if they create coherence on the dust, it also creates coherence in ourselves. So these shapes, pondering on them, when I was building this, I would have dreams about sacred geometry, and it really tuned me in. It was like, wow, isn't it amazing that you could just look at a shape and it really clears your energy just by looking at a shape, because you're meditating on it, yeah.
Well, it's sort of, I have a theory of life that's coming to mind, and as you say, balancing yourself.
Right.
But I think in terms of if there's something out of balance, if you cut yourself
Yeah.
or burn yourself,
Right, or get a
then
disease.
there's things within our body that go, something's out of balance in that body, and the right cells migrate to that and do start to heal. And that's what happens in all our bodies. And when I take that scale and take it in the world at this scale that we see,
Yeah.
that we're actually all cells responding to balance something.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So, when I can see, probably we don't understand how all these things fit together, but and some part of us knows, has that intelligence to be attracted to what it is we need to go to balance ourselves and that.
Same dance at a different scale.
Whatever-
We're a different scale.
And it certainly music has a part in that, shapes have a part in that, and then it's just getting to that place to connect, to make everything wants to be in balance, and we're drawn to that. And when we're not,
Yes, when we're not in balance, we're out of,
then that's when things start going wonky
Yeah, that's it.
everywhere. That we're resisting that pull, because
Yes.
it's not there's also
Yeah.
it's not a demand, it's an inclination,
right?
so you still have free will.
Yes. Well, that's why it's so important to tune into our heart and our gut when we see information in the universe, like in the news. It's so, if we get stuck in the head, it's really out of balance. It's just on the head level. But when we take some information in, we have to see if it fits. But I think a lot of us take information in that doesn't fit. Like, who doesn't? Like in our culture, you're born into this culture, and there's so much fear, and so we're still children. We're evolving out of these out-of-phase patterns and out-of-phase information that doesn't actually serve us at all. So a lot of it, all of these shapes relate to getting back into our harmony.
Can I add something? Thinking about the shapes as a tool for meditation or reflection, and you're saying that when we hold them, something changes within us, right? Like there's something special that happens. just looking at them, especially this one that Dan has Mod Podged all the different sacred geometry images in the 12 colors. It reminds me also of like in Tibetan Buddhism and in Eastern traditions, how they use mandalas as a tool for meditation. So like in Tibetan Buddhism, using the mandalas that are circular in the center and then square on the outside with the 4 gates. That's also, or you spoke earlier of the
Sri
yantra.
Yantra?
Yeah, it's a tool for consciousness raising and meditation. So it's kind of the same thing.
This is
But
interesting.
this is 3-dimensional, which is,
Well, I wonder what the Sri Yantra would look like 3-dimensional, but yeah, the Sri Yantra is one of these shapes that's used to ponder states of consciousness, to purify your soul. So yeah, they do relate.
How does all of that relate to chemistry?
Well, it relates to chemistry. One way is all the platonic solids, all the elements in the periodic table fit into one of the platonic solids. So the creation of the universe comes through those gates, those platonic solid gates. So when we see that, I think that's why Plato figured that he understood that too. You could see all the elements that come out of these shapes. Is that what you mean by how does it relate to?
Well, yeah, chemistry, you mean the elements, like...
Well, as far as our periodic
copper, zinc
table.
and stuff comes out of those elements?
Yeah, like all the crystals that you see in nature and the rock shapes and everything, and all of the elements in the periodic table do fit into one of the 5 platonic solids.
Yeah, I still don't understand what they have to do with
One of the interesting things,
Yeah.
it's nice not have to not have to understand it all.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's not like you need
Because
to understand
to me,
it.
it's impossible, to try and, it's like,
Yeah.
I'm in a river and it's flowing,
Yes.
but I don't need
Yes.
to know where it's
Well,
coming
yeah, you don't
from,
need to
how
know all the-
everything's working.
that's
It's like,
right.
I just need to know, I'm supposed to just let go and flow.
And
Yeah.
trust.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you for saying that.
You know,
That's great.
otherwise it's like, I'll never get in, I'll never get
No.
into the stream.
yeah.
I'm
can't
so
name
glad
everything
you
either.
say that.
Make sure you stay floating.
That's a concern, you can, well,
Yeah.
and you do, we test, you throw a stick and see if it.
And Ben
See how hot
City
it is.
sing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mona? Oh, Mona had a question.
No, it's okay, I'm realizing,
Yeah.
And Dan, I just want to say it's 12 o'clock.
yeah, that's why I
Well,
said
we,
it's okay.
the time doesn't exist. I can't see the time. It doesn't exist for me.
We're doing the potluck today, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, we are doing the potluck, which
Oh,
limits
okay.
us, but.
So do we have
But
15
we-
more minutes?
Sure.
Don't always wish we had it.
Okay.
There's
And I'm
another-
gonna pass the donations basket around too, to save some time for it, so
Okay.
Dan can keep talking and we'll.
Okay. I got a third of the way through this presentation, but that's great.
That's pretty
I heard Dad can keep
Just keep
talking.
going.
Yeah. Now, I want to play a video that kind of shows you how things are connected. This guy did some research on some of these numbers and saw that they're connected to ancient cultures. So anyway, I'm gonna play this video while that passes around, and I'm also gonna go to the washroom while it's playing.
Everybody else.
Do we have
Now, let's go
another
back for a
coming
moment.
in? Is that what-
Oops, what happened
Dan, we have another group coming in, that's why.
there? Okay, well, this isn't the long
Now
one.
let's go back for a moment and take a look at one of these numbers, 2160, the number expressed by both the cube and the germ of life pattern. You may have already noticed that without the 0, it is exactly half of our magic 432. That's worth noting, but what is even more intriguing is the way this number keeps showing up in other large-scale measurements. To discover one of these measurements, we will need to jump forward from Plato's time to when the Mayan civilization was flourishing. Roughly 1,500 years ago, Mayan stargazers were the most accomplished astronomers the world had ever known. Their concept of cyclical time led to many incredible discoveries. The accurate length of a year, the exact dates of seasonal changes, even the moments when solar and lunar eclipses would occur. But their most amazing discovery was of something known as the precession of the equinox, which makes note of a very slow wobble of Earth's axis. Somehow aware of the fact that this wobble takes 25,920 years to complete, the Mayans called this cycle one great year, with each of its 12 great months requiring 2160 Earth years to complete. And what about this? Did you know that the diameter of our moon, when measured in miles, also happens to total, you guessed it, 2160? Lastly, watch what happens when we apply simple division to this highly synchronous number. 2160 divided by 2 is 1080, the angle sum of the octagon. By 3, 720, the total of the hexagon. By 4, 540, the pentagon. By 5, are you ready? It's the ketone of 432. And by 6, 360, the number of both the square and circle. All F sharps and C sharps, with our 432A thrown into the mix, as if it were some kind of clue to solving a cosmic riddle. Maybe we should look at this number even more closely. As we've stated, our closest celestial neighbor, the moon, is 2160 miles across, and 216 is exactly half of 432. What about the other large object in our sky? Were you aware that our sun is 864,000 miles across? Incredibly, where the moon's base number sequence is half of 432, the sun's number sequence is exactly twice 432. And do you know how many seconds there are in a day? 86,400, or 43,200 for the 12 hours of day, and 43,200 for the 12 hours of night. Or try this. Take the 360 degrees found in the circular shape of our sun and moon, and then multiply it by the 12 hours of either day or night. The answer, 4320.
It just
Or
goes
how
on and
about
on
this?
and on and on.
What is the
All these
only whole number
synchronicities.
that when squared comes to within 0.01% accuracy to measuring the speed of light? 432. What is going on here? We have all these different things. Earth cycles,
That's almost
time
right.
and celestial measurements, geometry, sonic frequency, yet they are all represented by the same numbers over and over again.
And they always add up to
answer that,
9.
we must
All the
search for
sacred
factor
numbers
common.
always add up to 9.
Isn't 432 the?
So we're connected, yes.
Isn't that the chord, A chord or something?
Well, yeah, it's the original A, the middle A scale.
Okay. Oh, it's the original one.
The original A, yeah. I mean, it's still used all around the world, but it was in the 40s, our society adopted 440.
Okay.
Isn't it sort of like the riddle of, you know, how can we all be connected and all be one and yet be individual? But maybe a combination of that.
Well, that is a
And
riddle.
yet we're all
All these
created from the
separate
same-
beings then relate to the grand. It's just the universal mathematics of God, if you will, that is all showing us, hey, we're all connected. That's what all of these are saying. See, I'm just going to quickly go through this. I didn't get to Fibonacci or the phi ratio, but you see here.
Next week.
Yeah, well, you can see here all the divine proportions that we see in nature are all related to these sacred geometric frequencies. All the ancient art that you see in Japan, all around the world, the Mona Lisa, are all based on these ratios. I mean, obviously they were tuned in. All of the corporations, the biggest corporations in the world, all put in the sacred shapes, the sacred geometry. And all the ancient sites are based on the phi ratio and the 432 frequency. All the universe, the galaxies, the planets, the ferns, the continents. You can measure the size of the Earth with this frequency, and it's been measured, 12 other ways, the exact size. It's quite amazing. And there was an Indian mystic that came up with all of the planet sizes without ever needing a telescope, just based on frequencies. So this shows there's many ways. You don't need a telescope to discover the universe. You can do it inwardly through frequency. So what this is all telling us is that, yes, we're all connected. And it goes on and on and on, and we don't need to understand it. We just need to tune in, and we'll already feel those connected harmonies.
This is occurring to me. You ever seen there's, I don't know what's on Facebook or whatever, but it showed the different shapes of different food and how they help different parts of your body, like the walnut.
Yeah, like
When you transect the
brain.
walnut,
Yeah, it
it
looks
looks
like a
like a
brain.
brain, and it's pretty good brain food
Yes.
and broccoli and all of those sort of
Yeah,
things.
and heart food and dragon
Yeah,
food for the heart.
again, it's what you're attracted to.
Yeah.
What do you need?
Well, that's-
I mean, a
if
banana.
you tune into that sensitivity, then you're on your way. That's all you.
That's all you need to know.
That's all you need to know.
Yeah, that's all you need to know. It doesn't have to be mental, it can be just intuitive.
Well,
So thank you so much, guys. We're gonna close this. Thank you.